adventure begins on the Avalon Peninsula, just outside the capital city of St. John's, at Cape Spear. We begin our aerial journey over the scenic province of Newfoundland at a place where you can wake up to the first sunrise at the most easterly point in North America, Cape Spear. If you stand here with your back to the sea, the entire population of North America stretches out in front of you, and there's nothing behind you until Ireland. It is here you can walk in the footsteps of Canadian and American soldiers as they guarded St. John's from lurking German U-boats. Perched on a rugged cliff sits Cape Spear Lighthouse. Constructed in 1836, it is the oldest surviving lighthouse in the province, now a National Historic Site and an iconic symbol of Newfoundland's marine history. The story goes that in 1835, a dense fog enveloped an approaching warship carrying a VIP visitor to St. John's. The governor sent out several pilot boats and a young harbor pilot named James Cantwell, who succeeded in locating the ship and guiding it safely into the harbor. When asked what reward he would like, he requested the job of keeper at the Cape Spear Lighthouse, which was then under construction. It wasn't until 10 years later that James Cantwell became the second keeper of the lighthouse. He served for 35 years, and his son Dennis, who had been his assistant, later took over, and the Cantwell family kept the Cape Spear Light for over 150 years. A new concrete building was built to house the light in 1955. The original lighthouse building and the lightkeeper's residence have since been restored to the period of 1839 and are now open to the public. Some visitors attracted by the scenery and history have been swept away by the large and unpredictable waves, prompting Parks Canada to post numerous warning signs in the area. Continuing our journey on the Avalon Peninsula, it is the scenic town of Petty Harbour, first settled in the 1600s. Petty Harbour is a town of approximately 960 people and is located on the eastern shore of the Avalon Peninsula. It is nestled deep in the heart of Motion Bay, just south of St. John's. The present town is approximately 200 years old, though the site has been occupied since at least 1598, predating the arrival of the Mayflower and making it one of the oldest European settlements in North America. When John Cabot came to claim Newfoundland in 1497, there were already fishermen here in Petty Harbour and along the southern shore, and these people were from Portugal, Spain, and France, and were using Petty Harbour as a summer fishing station. And Though Petty Harbour has suffered from the current cod moratorium, it was built from and has been sustained mainly by the inshore cod fishery. Fishing activity for over 500 years includes crab, lobster, lumpfish, and cod. In recent years, Petty Harbour has become more reliant on the tourism industry. Many tourists visit the area for the beautiful scenery, icebergs, whales, and hiking trails. It has also become a popular location for TV series and movies. And some of the features have included orca, a whale for the killing, rare birds, and John and the Missus. Parts of the Terry Fox story were also filmed here in Petty Harbour. And some movie stars such as Bo Derrick, Richard Harris, Peter Strauss, and Newfoundland's own Gordon Pinson, to name a few, to appear in the movies filmed here. Petty Harbour Maddox Cove was also the Tidy Towns Population Category winner for 2007. This award is based on natural beauty, community involvement, environmental awareness, and heritage preservation. Petty Harbour is perhaps the most photographed and filmed place in Newfoundland. This is because of the harbour's undeniable scenic charm and its proximity to St. John's. It is recognized across Canada as a postcard scene or a backdrop for many newscasts concerning the fishing industry, such as the opening sequence of CBC's TV series Land and Sea. Next on the Avalon Peninsula, located 42 kilometers south of St. John's along Route 10 on the Irish Loop, it's the friendly community of Tours Cove. Nestled into a scenic and sheltered harbor, Tours Cove was another stopping point for visiting migratory fishermen in the late 17th century. Its name is believed to be derived from an Old English word for fox, and it was indeed the English themselves who are counted among the first to take up year-round residence here. As in many Newfoundland communities, most of the early settlers were migratory fishermen. Most of the fish were sold to merchants of nearby St. John's. A thriving cod fishery existed there by the late 19th century. When the restrictions placed on permanent settlement were lifted in the 1820s, a more stable community developed. A school was constructed in 1844, and a Roman Catholic church followed in 1869. In 1945, the population of Tours Cove was only 266, although it had previously peaked at 389 in 1884. However, during the program of resettlement in the 1950s and 60s, 6 more families moved to Torres Cove. A fish plant operated in the community until it burned to the ground in 1982, but since the moratorium and the collapse of the fishery in the 1990s, most of the residents are forced to seek employment in nearby St. John's and abroad. Today, while many residents still rely on the fishing industry for employment, others are plying their skills in new areas, including the province's growing oil and gas industry. But no matter where they chose to work, be it in Torres Cove, a neighboring community, St. John's, or even further afield, everyone here has at least one thing in common. They all choose the casual lifestyle and inspiring landscapes of Torres Cove to call home. Next on the Avalon Peninsula, located on the east coast at Conception Bay, we visit the historic town of Avondale. The Avondale Railway Station, built by the Anglo-Newfoundland Telegraph Company in either 1870 or 1880, served as a repeater station for the first telegraph landline serving St. John's. From 1900 to 1949, the structure was a freight and passenger station operated by the Reed Newfoundland Company, and it was an important terminus during World War II for transporting men working at the American military bases in Argentia. From Confederation in 1949 until its closure in 1984, the Canadian National Railway used the station as a terminus for their passenger and freight service in Conception Bay. It is now the oldest surviving railway station in Newfoundland. In recent years, the building has been used as a community and railway museum. With numerous artifacts from the railway era, the museum is open daily in July and August. The Newfoundland Historic Parks Association awarded the station a Manning Award. This award is presented in recognition of outstanding efforts in the public presentation of historic places within Newfoundland and Labrador. Established in 1993, the association named the award after former Superintendent for National Historic Parks in Newfoundland and Labrador, Bill Manning. The Heritage Foundation of Newfoundland and Labrador declared the station a registered heritage structure in February of 1988. Next on the Avalon Peninsula, on the Baccaloo Trail, with a history spanning almost 500 years, is the scenic town of Harbour Grace. It is one of the largest towns on the Baccalieu Trail and has one of the most well-developed harbors on the Avalon Peninsula. The town boasts many sites of cultural and historic interest. It is home to the oldest stone church in the province, the Cathedral of the Immaculate, St. Paul's Anglican Church. And moored in its harbor is the SS Kyle, built in 1913, became the first boat to provide Labrador with a regular scheduled service. The boat, which is immortalized in Ted Russell's poem, The Smoke Room on the Kyle, is an icon in Newfoundland culture. The SS Kyle was built in Newcastle, England in 1913. Constructed as part of the Reed Newfoundland Company's Alphabet Fleet. Shortly after commissioning, the SS Kyle was assigned to the North Sydney Port aux Basques ferry service. The vessel was purchased by Earl Brothers Fisheries of Carbonear in 1960 and used in the seal trade until 1967, when an iceberg accident caused her to be moored in Harbour Grace Harbour. Intended to transport supplies and provide transportation from Carbonear to Labrador, she was also used to transport infantry to Canada during World War II. After her grounding on the shores of Riverhead Harbour Grace, she has had several owners, from the Earl Brothers Freighting Company, Dominion Metals, and in 1972, the Government of Newfoundland purchased the vessel for $4,000. Plans to have the vessel moved to the town of Salmon Cove and turned into a museum were later aborted due to financial implications. The Harbour Grace airfield was a prominent figure in the history of transatlantic flight. The Spirit of Harbour Grace, a DC-3 airplane, was restored and donated to the town in 1993 by the Pike family to commemorate the town's rich past in aviation. From 1927 to 1936, more than 20 flights took off from Harbour Grace to fly the Atlantic, some of them piloted by famous aviators such as Amelia Earhart. As of 2011, the population was 398. It is the northernmost community in Conception Bay, Bay divert. Bay divert is located in Conception Bay on the Bay divert Peninsula, or what is known today as the Baccalieu Trail. The name Bay divert is of Portuguese origin. It is a historical fact that Portuguese and Spanish explorers frequented the area during the era of the great discoveries in the 15th and 16th centuries. In John Guy's visit to Bay divert in 1612, while on his way from Cupid's to Trinity Bay, he referred to it as Green Bay. And being used as a fishing station by the Portuguese in the early 16th century, before the advent of the English, would make it one of the earliest sites of European activity in North America. When the French began their devastating raids on the Avalon Peninsula in 1697, they found 90 good men at Bay divert. When you include women and children, there is no doubt that the permanent population was close to 200 people. Another French raid in 1705 saw equal devastation. This time, many of the established planters had more than they could take. Some of them left and moved to more fortified locations like St. John's and Trinity. In 1708, there were only 30 people at Bay divert. However, another group of settlers began to arrive after 1713. The French were given fishing rights along the northeast coast. These new settlers now included Irish as well as English, and although the English had more rights, the Irish began to establish themselves as well in the late 1700s. And by 1753, the population of Bay divert was 128, comprised of 69 English and 59 Irish. Next, on the Avalon Peninsula, we move inland to the town of Widmark. Unlike most communities on the island, Widmark is inland. It was founded in about 1880 during the construction of the Newfoundland Railway. And the railway continued to be an important employer in the town until its abandonment in 1988. Widmark is named after Sir Richard Widmark, one of the most colorful early settlers of the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, and who wrote a book about Newfoundland that was published in 1620. Sir Richard was appointed to set up the first English law court in the New World in 1615 in Trinity. He was kidnapped and held by the notorious pirate Peter Easton in Harbour Grace. Later, he became governor of Renews on the southern shore. Sir Robert Bond, the Prime Minister from 1900 to 1909, played a role in the expansion and planning of the town and developed an elaborate country home there called La Grange. The house is no longer in existence, but part of the estate is now Sir Robert Bond Park. Widmark has many of the amenities of a small town that has traditionally been a regional service center, and the town's wetlands conservation trail is of interest to many visitors. Next we go to the northern part of the island, to the Bay divert Peninsula, and visit the town of Lisi. With a population of approximately 1,240 people, Lisi is located at the end of Route 414 at the head of the Bay divert Peninsula between White Bay and Notre Dame Bay on the northeast coast of the island. It was used by the Basque fishermen who called the fishing station Port de Siege. The French named the town Lisi, meaning the saw. This refers to the hills around the community which resemble the teeth of a saw. Lisi was part of the French shore, La Petite Nord, from 1504 to 1904. And after the French stopped fishing the area, Lisi was settled by Irish and English fishermen, many of whom were previously living in nearby Shuko. There are several small islands near Lisi. The most noted are the Horse Islands, which are two large islands surrounded in places by dangerous rocks. Local names such as Hit or Miss Point and Nervous Point tell you the kind of reputation that the islands had among the people who fished and used the waters near Horse Islands. Fishing was always the main employment for the people of Lisi. In 1891, there were 104 residents, 32 of whom were fishermen. By 1911, there were 429 people. Most of the families fished for a living. Their catch included cod, herring, salmon, seals, and a small landing of lobster. In 1930, Fisheries Products Limited opened a fish plant which paid the fishermen 3 cents per pound for cod. The plant was only open for 5 years. July 1960 saw the opening of a new fish plant with 140 employees processing frozen fillets. Joe Brothers and Company opened up another plant in 1963 and also took salmon along with the codfish. National Sea Products bought the plant from Joe Brothers in the late 1970s. It employed 500 people in 1978, and in 1981 it employed 665 people. Nowadays, the total number of fishermen in Lisi is 281. These fishermen have a total number of 141 boats, from small speedboats for inshore fishermen to longliners for the offshore fishermen. The town has a public wharf and also 12 private wharfs. Most of these facilities are not in operation to the complete potential since the closure of the cod fishery. Other species did not represent a high percentage of the total catch for this area, and as a result of the restriction placed on cod, it was not feasible for the plant to remain open. The cod moratorium has had a drastic effect on the town of Lisi, with decline in employment opportunities. With its natural scenic beauty and rugged coastline, it is an attractive place for iceberg viewing and whale watching. Lisi has 4 kilometers of walking trails that stretch around the hills and take you near the water's edge. This is a great way to view the area, breathe in some of Newfoundland's fresh air, meet some locals, and if in season, pick some wild berries. Next on the Divert Peninsula, just 7 kilometers from Lisi, it is the town of Shuko. The town of Shuko is built around a small pond backdropped by tree-covered mountains. Shuko was originally known as Shuko Brook. The adjoining communities of Stage Cove and Shuko Bight were abandoned in 1970. The origin of the settlement's name has not been officially recorded. It may relate to the shape of the harbor or to some long-forgotten incident involving an early settler or visiting naval officer. Shuko was the last community on the east coast English shore, so clashes with French fishermen were more frequent than elsewhere. Early accounts indicate that the French relations with Ship Cove's English residents were not so good. Stones, pitchforks, and clubs were used, and many French were killed, giving rise to the stories of ghostly moans being heard in the area. As late as 1883, the HMS Foam anchored for the night off the fishing settlement of 280 to show the flag and keep the uneasy peace between Shuko's English residents and Shuko's inner pond French-speaking residents of Lisi. The first family mentioned in official records is the Tilley family. The Tilleys arrived in Newfoundland in 1675, and a Tilley operated a salmon fishery at Shuko in 1804. The first year-round settlers probably appeared some 38 years later. James Gray was a Shuko resident by 1842, and the first mention of a Welshman family was John Welchman in 1843. Isaac Clipp was certainly listed as a Shuko fisherman in 1852. More settlers arrived in 1850. The number of fishermen dropped from 35 in 1951 to 30 in 1959. The 1952 population was 147, and cod were sold to a buyer in nearby Nippers Harbor. In 1983, one longliner with 5 fishermen and 20 small boats with 43 fishermen supplied fish to the National Sea Plant in Lisi. Follow the road through town, past the grocery store, and down to the harbor. A fast-moving stream runs beside the road, under a boathouse and the road, out past the slipway dock into the harbor. That's where you'll find the amazing yellow wooden storage building built on the side of a cliff. The building is only accessible by boat. Although still largely a United Church community, Shuko now has a Pentecostal assembly. The old Methodist school was built before 1908, when it had 27 students, and closed in 1974. Just a few kilometers from Shuko, on the Divert Peninsula, we visit the smallest town in Canada, Cove. Founded in 1813, the mine at Cove, the first in Newfoundland, was opened in 1864 and was soon employing several hundred men at good wages. Ores found at Cove are gold, copper, and zinc. 1,370 people lived in Cove in 1901, and by 1956 there were just 57. The population of Cove was considered sparse a few years ago, when there were just 7 residents calling the town home. But since 2015, it has almost been cut in half, and now just 4 people live there year-round. And now, with a population of 4, Cove is referred to as Canada's smallest town and keeps getting smaller. In its heyday, from the late 1800s to the mid-1900s, Cove was a booming mining town. In 1857, Smith Mackay discovered rich deposits of copper ore, and in 1864, in conjunction with C.F. Bennett, began mining operations. In the 1880s, the Cove mine changed ownership to the Cape Copper Company, and in 1916, the population peaked to 1,500. In 1892, the Newfoundland Colonist, a newspaper, described Cove as the leading town in Notre Dame Bay, with the sides, top and bottom of the mines being one solid mass of copper, looking as if it would be everlasting. On one afternoon, approximately tea time on March the 11th, 1912, there was an avalanche at Cove in which there were 5 injuries and 5 fatalities. The town was once very prosperous, but there was a time, like now, when it was not. In 1920, the mines closed and the population dropped to around 100 and remained that way until the mines reopened in 1957. The Cove mine was reopened and Cove experienced a rebirth. And in 1967, the mines closed down not to reopen until modern mining activity began. But long gone are the grocery store, movie theater, bowling alley, and pubs that the residents once enjoyed. When the town's mine closed, it didn't take long for the businesses to follow and for most of the town's estimated 1,500 residents to move away. And by 1956, there were only 57 residents left. Now, members of just one family are the last hangers-on. Margaret Collins serves as the town's clerk, and her husband, Don, is the mayor. Collins' brother lives next door and is married to her husband's sister. Both are town councilors. Our journey continues to the northeast coast to visit the offshore island of Fogo. With a population of approximately 2,240, 15 kilometers off Newfoundland's northeast coast, it was named do Fogo by the Portuguese, which means Fire Island. It is the largest of the offshore islands of Newfoundland and Labrador. It is about 25 kilometers long and 14 kilometers wide, and is connected by ferry with Farewell, and now supports 11 communities, though it once had 26. Until the late 1700s, Fogo was a summer home of the Beothuk. European fishermen visited its waters from the early 1500s, and summer residence began at Fogo. Migratory French fishermen visited Fogo Island from the early 16th century until 1718. The first permanent settlement of the island took place in the 18th century. Fogo Harbour and Tilting Harbour were the first settlements on the island. The English and Irish descendants of the first inhabitants retain traces of their English and Old Irish dialects, which can be heard on the island today. In the 1960s, attempts to resettle Fogo Island were countered by a movement toward rural development aided by the National Film Board of Canada, whose short documentaries helped to unite residents crossing traditional, social, cultural, and religious lines. From the early 1990s, with the downturn in the fishery, Fogo Island has and is continuing to promote its tourist attractions such as museums, hiking trails to abandoned settlements, icebergs, whales, and the outport way of life. Brimstone Head, a prominent landmark in the town of Fogo, has been proclaimed by the Flat Earth Society as one of the four corners of the earth. Located on the northeast tip of the island and is characterized by the rugged coastline that surrounds it, we visit Joe Bat's Arm. With a population of over 1,000 people, Joe Bat's Arm is the largest of the 11 communities on Fogo Island. It is located on the northeast tip of the island and is characterized by the rugged coastline that surrounds it. Settlers arrived in this region as early as 1712, but the community didn't acquire its current name until several decades later. According to legend, Joe Bat's Arm is named after a crew member of Captain James Cook, who jumped ship in order to settle down in the region. Apparently, he deserted the notorious explorer in 1763 when surveying work brought them to Gander Bay. He later arrived on Fogo Island made this coastal community his home until his death. In the old days, the arm referred to any settlement that wrapped around an inlet. As the story goes, people living in this particular arm were so fond of Joe Bat that they named it after him. At one time, the fishery in Joe Bat's Arm consisted of family-run stages. The numerous stores and stages that still cling to the shoreline are a reminder of the past. Nowadays, fishery is big business, represented by a fish plant and large fishing trawlers that make use of the harbour. The local fishermen work seasonally to catch crab, squid, cod, shrimp, and turbot. These catches are then sold to various fish plants around Fogo, including the plant in Joe Bat's Arm. Since this plant is the community's primary source of employment, many of Joe Bat's residents work here to process seafood, which is then sold around the world.
If you come back home to Newfoundland, put aside your city charm. Stop off at a fish plant at a place called Joe Bat's Arm. As you approach that busy scene, you'll see some fishermen, but most of all you'll see the big long liners coming in. For the Joe Bat's Arm longliners, they're coming home tonight. As they steam up the harbor, you can see the vast headlight. With their hardy crews and captains, they're the finest fishermen. And the girls are all excited, the longliners coming in.
And also making Joe Bat's arm famous around the world and attracting the rich and famous is a 21st century design-minded Fogo Island Inn Hotel. It is the fine balance between modern contemporary architecture. Next we go to the northeastern part of the province, Division Number 7, located in Freshwater Bay. We visit the town of Gambo. With a population of approximately 2,000, Gambo is the closest town to Mint Brook, the birthplace of Joseph R. Smallwood, former Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador and the last father of Confederation. Gambo is situated in a richly forested river valley where the Gambo River meets the sea in Freshwater Bay, central Bonavista Bay. It is composed of 3 adjacent and formerly distinct communities, Dark Cove, Middlebrook, and Gambo, which formed the town of Gambo. Until October 3, 1980, the community was known as Dark Cove, Middlebrook, Gambo, and on that date, the area, which had been a rural district, was reincorporated as a town and officially renamed Gambo. The names Gambo and Middlebrook were recorded for the first time in the census in 1857. Dark Cove was first recorded in the census in 1884. Before that time, all settlement sites in the area, which included Hay Cove, Man Point, and Hare Bay, were enumerated under the heading Freshwater Bay, the name of the long indraft of Bonavista Bay along which they were situated. And according to M.F. Howley, the name Gambo means Bay of the Does, the name by which the area appears on early maps. The Gambo area, with its fast-flowing streams draining many ponds, and its heavily wooded land with rich, dark soil capable of supporting small-scale agriculture, has been an attractive area for commercial salmon fishing since the 18th century, and for industrialized harvesting of its large forest stands since the mid-19th century. It was first visited by salmon fishermen who fished the Gambo River and other streams in Freshwater Bay. The first steam-driven sawmill in Newfoundland was established here. The first weigh office was established in 1882 under Weighmaster Simon Osmond. Residents continued to be employed cutting or processing timber products for other local mills and for large paper companies until a series of forest fires, especially in 1961, consumed most of the remaining stands. Although the railway ceased operations in 1988, Gambo, on the route of the Trans-Canada Highway and at the start of the highway to northern Bonavista Bay, continues to be a major regional service centre. Our journey continues to Bonavista North, to the community of Greens Pond. The community of Greens Pond comprises several islands. The largest is Greens Pond Island. There are several explanations of the origin of the name Greens Pond. The most popular is that it is based on the names of two of the early families, Green and Pond. Another states that the name reflected the green of the trees that covered the island and the harbour basin, which resembled a pond. The fabric of the church is deeply woven into Greens Pond's history. The early settlers from the west country of England brought their religious affiliations with them. The first visit by a clergy was Reverend Henry Jones of the Church of England. His first trip to Greens Pond was in 1728, but the first church came much later. St. Stephen's Church was opened in 1812 and owes its construction to the efforts of Governor Sir John Thomas Duckworth, who had allocated funds for the building of the church. In the late 19th century, the Salvation Army came to Greens Pond and built a citadel upon the island. Later, as membership grew, another larger citadel was built down by the main road. And in 1826, there were 500 Protestants and 100 Catholics, but many of them were to move elsewhere. Greens Pond's chief asset was its proximity to the inshore cod fishing grounds. During the 19th century, fishermen not only exploited the local fishing grounds, but also went further afield to find codfish, some as far as the coast of Labrador. The community's location in the path of the northern ice flow enabled land-based hunters using guns and nets to capture seals. By the early 19th century, the seal hunt had become an important part of life at Greens Pond. Early in the 20th century, the Fishermen's Protective Union, which had a large branch in Greens Pond, opened a union trading store in the community, and in 1910 Greens Pond had the honor of hosting the union's annual convention. Gradually, Greens Pond acquired the services and facilities needed by a bustling commercial town. In 1848, there was a regular mail and passenger service, a fortnightly steamer, and a weekly overland route between Greens Pond and St. John's. To ensure the safety of the steamer into Greens Pond after nightfall, the government erected a lighthouse in 1873 on Puffin Island. In winter, when the steamers did not run, the trains transported the mails to Gambo, and from there couriers, often Micmac, carried it overland to Greens Pond. John Joe, perhaps the most notable Micmac courier, traveled for many years with his dogs from Gambo to Greens Pond. Throughout the 20th century, the fishery remained the major economic enterprise of the people of Greens Pond. In 1951, the town was incorporated, and with a municipal government came water and sewer facilities, improved light and power services, improvement in local roads, and perhaps the most important of all, the construction of a causeway connecting Greens Pond Island with the mainland.